Today's main topic is how do you actually get out of debt? We've spent a few episodes now where I've picked on debt. I've picked on debt tools. I've picked on credit cards, and I've definitely picked on advice that says that you should take out as much debt as possible in order to build wealth. So let's say you're in a position now where you no longer want debt in your life. You no longer want debt to represent your future time, your future life being promised away to work when you could otherwise have freedom, when you could otherwise choose to go to work because you want to, not because you have to. You want to get out of debt. How do you start? Where do you start? It might be obvious, but the very first step to getting out of debt is stop adding more debt. If you are spending with credit cards and you're trying to get out of debt, it's going to be important that you cut yourself off from those credit cards. It may be challenging to literally cut yourself off from them or cut them in half. Dave Ramsey would call this a plastectomy. So if you find it too challenging to do that and you don't want to let go of them, an alternative would be to take your credit cards, put them in a little Tupperware, fill it with a little water, and pop that thing in the freezer. That way, if you ever want to use a credit card in the future, you would literally have to unfreeze your credit to do it. Step 2 to getting out of debt. You need to build yourself a cushion to prevent debt from entering your life again. You've decided that you're not going to get into any more consumer debt, but there are emergencies that pop up. So many of us in America say we need a credit card in order to cover an emergency. If your credit card's over here on ice, then you need to have some semblance of savings to cover an emergency. Dave Ramsey calls this baby step 1. I call this footstep 1 on your path to hope-filled financial success. Now, Dave recommends that you have $1,000, no more, no less, for your starter emergency fund for that first step. I'm going to say, especially after the huge bout of inflation that we've experienced, this number probably needs updated. It's possible that your expenses don't necessitate that you need an awful lot to get through an emergency. In that case, $1,000 is probably okay. If we go back to when Dave Ramsey started his Financial Peace University back in the 80s, he still said that step 1 was $1,000. If you adjust that $1,000 from when Dave started for inflation today, you'd find that it's closer to $3,000. Recently, I had a major mechanical issue pop up with my car. In going to the mechanic for maintenance, it was discovered that the shocks were seeping. The shocks on their own were $1,000 to replace. There were also another $1,000 worth of things that needed fixed on the car. So it's reasonable to say that even a frugal car can run you $1,000 in the case of an emergency repair that's completely unexpected. I think $3,000 is a good target for your starter emergency fund to give you a buffer from having to go into debt in the case of an emergency. If you end up in a major emergency that costs way more than your starter emergency fund, you may have to concede that you're going to owe money in the case of that emergency, and that's okay. We're just going to restart the plan after you get through the emergency. Okay, what's the third step on our path to getting out of debt? This step I would call footstep number 2. Take control. Take control with a budget. Know your zero-based budget inside and out. Know what your necessities are and cut them down to the bare bones that you need to survive. Dave Ramsey would call this the beans and rice budget. I call it the bare bones budget. I don't want any eating out to be on my budget when I'm trying to get out of debt. It's going to be so much more economical and efficient for me to be eating at home and packing sack lunches for work. And while I'm getting out of debt, so I can get out of debt as fast as possible, it's going to be important that I delay any wants that are indeed genuine wants until after I get out of debt. Now, it takes about 3 months to get used to budgeting if you're budgeting for the first time. You don't have to wait until the end of those 3 months to move on to the next step. And that's because the next step becomes a part of your budget. This is the part that Dave Ramsey has truly popularized. And this is what I believe Dave is most famous for and what he's most successful for conveying, and that is the debt snowball. The debt snowball is the idea that if you list your debts from smallest balance to largest balance and you pay them off in that order, you literally snowball your debts. You're going to, more often than not, be successful in getting out of debt. There are other methods, such as the debt avalanche. The debt avalanche dictates that you list your debts from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. We've talked about on the podcast before how high interest rates, like the interest rates on credit cards, are going to cost you so much more in interest than a lower interest rate loan, say a personal loan that you got a good deal on in the middle of COVID. However, when you run a debt snowball and you pay minimum payments on everything except the little guy, you put all of your focus on it, you get a quick win. Just like in Angry Birds, you get something that gets you excited. You get an accomplishment that you can stand on and say, hey, I can do this. And then that payment, the minimum payment you had for that little debt that is gone, well, you get to add it to your income power that you're using to knock out the next debt. So every single time you take out a little debt, it gives you more power, it gives you more experience, and it gamifies getting out of debt. It makes it so that the next one that otherwise might look daunting is actually just the next step on the ladder, moving from 2 stars to 3 stars on an Angry Bird level. In very rare occasions, it may be advantageous to move a high-interest debt that is further down on the snowball to something that has lower interest or consolidate in some manner. The problem, though, with debt consolidation is it makes you feel like you've made progress when you've actually simply moved the pea from one cup to another cup. You've simply moved the debt that still needs taken care of, but you also feel that you've made genuine progress, which might make you want to lean back and say, you know, I think I've done enough for now. I think we can let this rest. But in reality, all that's doing is acting against the gamified debt snowball. It's slowing you down, and it's taking away some of your motivation to be intense to get to that high interest debt. If you look at your debt snowball and you look at your budget and you map out how long it's going to take you to get out of debt, and it takes you more than 2 years, well, that's when you kick in the snowflake method. The snowflake method is basically selling something in order to get a little bit of non-recurring income that you can pack onto the snowball to help it roll down the hill faster. Basically trying to run a garage sale so that you can convert some of your wants that you acquired back into cash and apply it to getting out of debt. Effectively, the snowflake method is anti-consumerism in mindset. Now, don't forget, as you're working through the debt snowball, it's important that you pay minimum payments on everything except the smallest one. That way you can focus all of your power on it and roll the snowball down the hill faster. As you roll the snowball down the hill, what you're going to find is you're going to start getting out of debt faster and faster, even faster than you may have mathematically predicted. The reason being is, as you go, it becomes addicting getting out of debt. It becomes a game, just like Angry Birds, and that's how you get out of debt. You turn it into something that you want to accomplish and something that leverages that same psychological energy that an addictive mobile game will do. You gamify getting out of debt and you make it something that you want to accomplish, something that you want to come back to over and over and over again until you get out. And just like me, when I downloaded the Angry Birds app again and I looked at the mountain of levels that were in front, you don't necessarily ever want to go back. Once you're out of debt, stay out of debt. And you never have to go through that intense journey of sacrifice ever again. But you've done something pretty significant in getting out of debt. You have freed up your greatest wealth building tool, your income, so that you can live and give like no one else. So you can invest in your future. So you can literally buy back your future time and give yourself the choices that when you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're buried in debt, you can only dream of. Next week on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, I have an article that I'm going to go through. It's entitled 10 Benefits of Credit Cards. Given that I've picked on credit cards quite a bit so far on this podcast, I'm going to have to assume that next week will be interesting and entertaining. Until then, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.